wanted to welcome Trey and Tanya, who are joining us through the Now What Global Gathering and Gift Economy. So we've been doing these interviews, Matteo and Michelle, as you may know, and as kind of a fishbowl, letting other people sit in as witnesses and then bringing them in at the end for some dialogue. But we haven't designed them where we spend a whole lot of time bringing people up to speed. So Tanya and Trey, just, if we're talking a lot of stuff that sounds like inside baseball, I apologize. We can certainly, process it together more afterwards, but you should know, and even for Dunya, who's working on our team, because Matteo and Michelle and Leslie and I have been working together on and off in different ways for years, we may be referring to some things you just won't get. But rather than sort of stopping and explaining stuff along the way, I just would request your, your indulgence in that. And it'll be really interesting to see what kind of what comes through from all of this. Definitely want to hear from you at the end of the process. And it matters to have witnesses also. So thank you for being here.
Very much. Thank you. And thank you, Dunya and Ben, for being the TRCC co-funding listening team. I'll talk more about what we're doing here in a minute. And thank you, Michelle from Movement Generation and Matteo from Movement Generation, who also have over the years played major roles in steering the Climate Justice Alliance. That's a national collective. We usually don't say too much about the whole context because we assume that people can read bios online, and we like to just get into the conversation. So I'll just say that from my perspective, Matteo and Michelle and the whole Movement Generation Collective have been just beloved friends, become beloved friends, and major mentors of mine in the journey to a just transition. The whole language of just transition comes from their work. I have about, copies of their zine, and I can think back to times way back when we worked together on Pioneers on that Resilient Communities Network meeting. That was the first time I remember things that Matteo was saying in the front of the room just like hit me like, oh my gosh. And I started really getting the power of power and started, thinking about power and land, and that comes from you. So thank you for who you are and what you do, and just showing up in the ways that you do. It matters more than you can even imagine. So we're really grateful that you've made the time to be here today to help us dream into what's next. We are at I think an important tipping point in the Thriving Resilient Communities Collaboratory history. The last time we stopped to do a deep listening process with allies, we began with a deep listening process with allies in the first place in 2011. We gathered like 30 people and said, should we, what's up, what's going on? Should we form a funding circle within Threshold, and should we form this collaboratory? And the answer was a resounding yes. And the next time we did it was in 2014, where we were listening for what's next. And that led to an interview inquiry process and a report, which ended up being a catalyst for creating this council where the Threshold Funding Circle turned over the power for making the collaborative funding decisions to the group of people who had grants on the table. And that was our practice in shifting and sharing power. And Matteo was right there in the middle of all that too. He was one of the first council members. And now here we are 5 years later, listening again. What's next? What's the next generation of what we're doing together? What's our next move in this movement generation as allies? And we are doing these formal interviews with a dozen or so people so far, more to come, many other informal ones. And we're calling it a co-funding discovery process. where we're listening for what's going on in people's work, doing just transition work in the world, and what the role is of funding in collaborative and democratic ways. And, you know, MG and CJA have, we've learned a lot of our practices from the shared governance that you do, both in MG and in CJA, and the ways that you're practicing moving money through democratic loan funds. And I remember all the birthing process that you went through to do that. So we just want to hear whatever stories you want to share today. We're going to start out with the success story that comes to mind for each of you, however you want to play off each other, about the success story about collaborative funding, collaborative governance, moving money, sharing power that is alive for you right now.
Okay. Thank you so much. I guess just first, yeah, I think we're both honored, and it's very sweet to be with you, the two of you, Leslie and Ben, and then to have y'all to witness and participate in this conversation. Yeah, just grateful too for the work that you've been doing. Like we all have important roles to play, right? That's what the transition is about. Wherever you sit in this economy, this extractive economy, you know, how do we transition our roles and the structures in which we live to be able to transform, right? So yeah, just appreciating that. Do you want to start, Mateo? Do you have a success story that you want to share?
I could go either way. If you're ready to start, I'm good with you going, but if you want me to start, I can do that too.
Yeah, if you don't mind, go for it. And
Sure.
Build.
Like you just shared, Michelle, it's really fun to be here. It's a real honor, and it is sweet to just feel in my body the memory, the historical memory we share together. So thank you, Leslie, for grounding us in that. And yeah, Leslie, Ben, yeah, we've been through a lot together. So it's really sweet to be face to face, if I can say that virtually, after such a long time. And it's great to be with all five of you. I mean, I think the first thing that came to mind is a bit meta, but I think it starts getting at some of the question, which, you know, and I'm holding how in moments of big transition, you know, the shadow side, the scary parts cohabitate, you know, the scary tendencies also cohabitate with some of the most luminous opportunities that folks are seizing. And one of the things that comes to mind when you were talking about Bay Area is just the where we are now, versus where we were, say, 5 or 10 years ago, around the existence of the Seguridad Land Trust, the existence of housing cooperatives that are flourishing, and just the shifting terrain as it relates to a growing conception of what it means to return land to a cooperatively held and historically rooted set of criteria and beliefs. That feels really important. And in relation then to what COVID has offered us as an opportunity to reflect and slow down and rethink and remake governance, amongst other things, and then the uprisings. You know, 2020 is such an overwhelming year, and we definitely, you know, are experiencing so many of the scarier pushbacks. But the pushbacks are, to me anyway, also an expression of they're pushing back because they're scared of where we're pushing forward, to use a clunky analogy, or I don't know if it's an analogy, but y'all know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So that's, you know, it's everything is contested terrain right now, and we're being overwhelmed by violent pushback in so many ways, but nevertheless, everything is contested terrain right now, and there's tremendous hope in that alone. So those were some of the initial thoughts that came to mind.
Yeah, I guess just to build on that, I mean, Matteo talked about rematriation. That feels really powerful, like where we are today in terms of just using the word, not necessarily fully we haven't operationalized it yet. But I know as Movement Generation, we're really committed to trying to figure that out and learn and find our role in the 100-year vision that Segurite and other allies have put forth for a vision of rematriation on these Kharkine and Chochenyo Ohlone lands, that we call the Bay Area, right? So rematriation, but also reparations and reinvestment. I think those three calls to action are much further along than they were when we first got together. They're common in the lexicon. I think this spring, the incredible pain that birthed a new moment of movement organizing for Black lives and for all of, for the planet, in the defund police, movement really was a part of that, as a part of like, how do we shift our resources out of this death spiral system into systems that support life. And then reparations, I think, is continuing to just bubble and work its way through and hopefully up and and grow in our toolkit. But I think, the transfer of land and capital continues to be core to, I think, what more and more of our movements are learning to center, but also to then govern and steward, right? Those are like, we're always moving towards that. So Leslie mentioned the loan funds that, we were a small part of helping to nurture, but, now there's some more than 25 loan funds across the US that are part of that financial cooperative, but then even others that are forming that are related or, or not related. And that's really exciting to see the bubbling up of community control of capital, right? And putting that to use towards a just transition. So I think some success stories are, Richmond. I think the work that's been continuing there around the Cooperation Richmond Loan Fund in pairing with all of the other ways to move money and turn it into like meeting needs directly controlled by communities, and then again wield that as political power to get more, to kind of like grease the wheels and keep them turning towards this transition, I think has been really powerful to see. And just thinking of a lot of new buckets that have been started, starting to form, because I think one of the biggest challenges, I mean, this is the challenge that TRCC was trying to navigate, is like, well, movements don't have yet their own governance of how they want funds to be distributed. And so philanthropy for now is making those decisions. Ultimately, I believe we need communities that are on the front lines, organized through movements in this stage, to be making those decisions. And I think it is a success that we have made strides towards that we know it's important, that we're, our movements are starting to center it more and more, and that we've built some of those vehicles to make those decisions and transfer wealth back to the communities it was stolen from. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you say anything more? Just tell me a little bit more about Cooperation Richmond, and right now and what's happening with the loan funds, because I haven't been up to date on that. And I'm curious if you can also identify any of the key elements that are greasing the wheels, as you said, leading to the successes of these loan funds that are forming and the land trusts that are forming. They're related, I know.
Yeah. I mean, I can't, it's funny because I'm texting with Doria and Najari because we're going to present on a Bioneers panel together that we put together on Sunday. So I don't actually have the latest update yet about Cooperation Richmond. So I can't really speak to that. But I know they've been growing and, you know, doing a ton of like workshops and, you know, or I think what's critical about what they're doing there, but also in Boston, you know, there's examples of this in many places. It's like, how are we organizing to meet economic needs ourselves rather than solely challenging or confronting the systems that are keep just like pushing us down or harming us or poisoning us or so I think the fact that they are organizing people to believe that their own visions for their communities are not only sound, but can be made viable with like some support around business planning and, you know, governance coaching. But then also that money can flow to those places, you know, like I know for us as movement generation, like this is kind of on the down low, but we're about to launch a big effort to get our own land and actually not our own, we would rematriate it ultimately in partnership with Segura Te, but to steward a place where we can have trainings and, you know, have our movement building efforts housed. And we didn't really believe that was possible until someone came forth and said, I want to support you in that. And here's $500,000, you know, to $500,000 to just like, because I believe in what you're doing. And if you say that's what needs to happen, I believe that that's what needs to happen, you know? And I just think that over and over again, community members from frontline communities have been fooled into believing that their visions aren't important and don't matter. And so as money flows to these places, you know, I think of it as like what Cooperation Richmond is doing is wetting the sponge. You know, they're like trying to get just some money to start flowing so that people are seeing, oh, you can get investment in the bike shop that has been serving our communities on like breadcrumbs, you know, for a decade, but now they have enough capital to like have an inventory and have a, you know, window display and all of those things that they're seeing that there's possibility, right? So people will be more willing to like, oh, maybe I would be interested in owning my own business that, you know, I have been running on the side. Or I just think that kind of organizing, it's like a shift in organizing and what the organizing is about and towards that is regenerative in and of itself. You know, it's like meeting some very core human needs in the process.
And maybe to connect that to your prior question, Leslie, about specific examples, now that my brain is also settling into the question with more precision. I think one of the exciting things that we have the honor of experiencing is to see how so much of this cross-pollination inspires new ways that folks are trying to create pathways to return capital to the commons. So for example, you know, it's not only through CJA, that's but one venue through which folks like the Dorias and Najaris and Co-op Richmond are in constant dialogue with others and sharing stories. So one of the examples that inspires me is, you know, just a couple of years back in Portland, folks that now have coalesced around a new entity called the Oregon Just Transition Alliance. But some of the organizations that are part of it, like Apano, which is a leading API organization in Portland, led actually a ballot box initiative that succeeded to create a fund. It was a tax on big box retail. So, they capped it. Only entities that make this much in profit will have to pay. So it was very targeted to put money into a fund to create a community controlled electricity grid, or power generating grid that's community controlled, with a very strong EJ lens onto it. And I'll be honest, prior to that, I hadn't seen much experimentation around kind of elections and the ballot box in relation to this, and they succeeded. And it suddenly became like, oh, here's a whole new front of possibility.
Yeah,
but
tens
again,
of millions of dollars annually that can be distributed
Right.
based on sustainability rather than extraction.
And so that, I think that again, the reality of cross-pollination with folks just being bold, to use your language, what you said at the front end, Leslie, is like, this is our local context. Let's just do this. And they did, and they succeeded. And then what that has led to, again, Oregon is an example, the Gulf South is an example, the Detroit area is another example of folks trying to define, leading and defining what a Green New Deal means on their terms, not on something that's federally mandated, not at something that's defined by politicians above us. And like, the Oregon Just Transition Alliance, again, is a good example. They already have a robust platform that, amongst other things, includes like, keep oil in the soil, no more new development, moratoriums, let's close this stuff down. Natural gas being like pumped to their coast is one of the big battle lines. So they've been very clear. So like, to us, that's what a Green New Deal is. Like, that we got to pull back on that development. We got to, nothing new, and let's tear out the old. So that's another, I guess I give a very precise example of something that was done to create a new pool of funds, and then an ideological form of leadership of like, we are going to define this through a frontline lens that's very practical and visionary and oppositional, all wrapped into one. So that is very exciting too. And again, it's contested terrain with a multiplicity of players, in relation to Green New Deal. To just digress for a second, we're not only up against the gray big business, there are many profiteers who are trying to wear a green mantle, who are trying to define the Green New Deal too. So that's been a really important aspect of frontlining the frontline vision around these questions.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just say one other example that comes to mind in the back to the Bay Area is at the end of last year, frontline communities came together to form a new campaign called Reclaim Our Power, which is about, as y'all all know, PG&E has been responsible, has been found criminally negligent for not doing the work that it was funded to do to repair power lines and, all of these things. But, ultimately it's like just propping up a failing system. And if the front lines are not crafting a vision for what that energy system needs to look like, then there's hell of people lined up to craft a vision that is in line with, a very different vision for the future, right? So that campaign has been a very powerful space to organize, first of all, build a vision with, the kinds of solutions and strategies that have been discussed and created by environmental justice communities, for decades, but now with a real platform for like the political moment is such that, the state is poised to transition PG&E into Golden State Energy, which is right now just a black box, right? When one of a number of possible triggers is set. And so we're organized now to be able to actually put forth this vision, and and we've been like mobilizing with lots of other community partners in really powerful ways, even through COVID. Being able to speak to the regulators and politicians to make our case, and I think it's really already moved the needle quite a bit. And I think the thing that this is like back to the point that y'all were making earlier. The question is, Matteo was naming, like, are we all in, or are we gonna continue to like hoard and hold on to some resources? Like, we need funders to believe, like, to see our vision, and trust us, to be able to carry it out. But we're not going to be able to carry it out with a $500,000 budget, when PG&E's lawyers spend that in an hour. You know what I'm like? So that's the space that we're in right now, is like, are y'all with us, or are you going to hold on to the old system, so that, because then we're never going to get there, and that's a very scary prospect.
Yeah, I'm just sitting with that. I happen to be right now in kind of a deep climate justice grief moment. A couple things have just hit me in the last 24 hours, and so I'm really hearing you with, it's time to be all in. It's time to be big, be bold, and to claim the community control, which we need. And I've learned a lot of that language from you. So again, thank you. So from this place of bigness and boldness and deep yearning, if you were to name 3 wishes between the two of you, or maybe you get 4, couple each, for what would be the most important things that you would wish for to bring success going forward. You're involved in so many initiatives. I don't want to name which one, but whatever, is the most alive for you.
I'll throw out the starts of one in the hopes that Michelle will kind of fill it in, because I actually see you, Michelle, as one of the leading thinkers and strategists around this question. It felt quite effervescent and promising at the front end of COVID, when folks started talking about, full-on rent moratoriums and rent strikes, and just a radical rethinking of the conception of housing and the conception of property writ large. So yeah, this is where I look to you, Michelle, but I think there's kind of the ... ellipsis is like, some of that feels like it's closed momentarily because of the elections and some of the pushback. But I think there's definitely a wish there on like, what is a shifting of the common sense in society into good sense stance around, again, property and housing and rent, and what that would lead to.
I think what you're naming, just to expand on that for a second, not to waste one of my wishes. No. I still want my wishes. No.
You have what you need. Go ahead.
That's one of my wishes right there. yeah, is like that the veil. I think that's kind of what you're referring to, right, Mateo? Is like we all saw the veil really lift for that moment where people were like, "Wow, what if people didn't like everybody had health care that, you know, in a way that was dignified and life affirming, and, you know, housing in this way that it wasn't tied to like, oh, you can't pay your rent, sorry, you don't get to live in a house or a home. You know, your kids don't have a roof over their head. It just became so obvious in that moment. My daughter is down doing a little dance, sorry. And so yeah, I think that I think there is still, I mean, the truth is COVID is not the last thing. It's not the first, it's not the last. There's been many things in 2020. And I think it's part of our role as organizers to liberate the imaginations as to what's on the other side of the veil, you know, like beyond the veil. What can we have and create that's different? I think that's been a little bit of the stuckness, is like we're all stuck in our homes and there isn't as much like creative possibility that people are feeling. And so I wish for that. I wish for that space of radical imagination combined with, you know, and paired with the veil lifting and the boldness of the human spirit to not be held back, to like, you know, okay, I have what I need, or I'm only concerned about what I need, you know. I just think this we've seen that already. So many people have come out and done mutual aid and like given whatever they have to, you know, support other people in this time. And so yeah, my wish is for more of that. You know, that these openings really create those kinds of, continue to build on those possibilities. And then I'll say like another wish is for our movement leaders to have the resources to take the space to build these like buckets, because that they can control and govern, like that we can collectively control and govern resources for real. Because right now we are pitted against each other when we know that like if M for BL, if the movement for Black Lives doesn't have what it needs, then the climate justice movement doesn't have what it needs. You know, like that's the reality. But we're supposed to like not represent each other or not, you know, like, so I want to see us be at the same table, writing the big budgets together that then philanthropy is just writing the checks for. You know, that the line items are the ones that our movement leaders are putting together and making the decisions on. You know what I'm saying? Like that's the docket. So that's, yeah, that's one wish, is for that shared governance. Yeah. You have another one?
I mean, I'm getting flashes of Avi Lewis's recent cartoon depiction of the future. Yeah, and one of the really beautiful aspects of it is it doesn't shy away from interpreting, you know, the next 3, 4, 10 years are hard, and there are more pandemics, and you know there are and the vision of what it looks like for us to shift into what Michelle was describing, a full we stance, and what it takes then to rebuild, you know, human settlement and society from a cooperativist perspective, I think is really beautifully captured in that cartoon and narrated very sweetly too. So I think if I were to transform that into a wish, one of it is that pretty much everyone embraced that the future is going to be hard, and it is on us to make it an elegantly equitable process. You know, there's so much that is frightening about this political moment because fear is being trafficked so heavily as a way to motivate folks to not care, or to actually actively hurt others. So I think that would be a wish. Is like, what does it take for most or all of us to wake up and go like, wow, yeah, as Michelle said, the veil's lifted, and it's, yeah, what's the elegant, equitable way to proceed as a team, as a full team from here on out? Because I think most people feel it in their bones. The future is gonna get harder, and that's I think that's the psychic organizing spiritual task upon us all.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm feeling it. That's for sure. Kind of comes in waves, and this is another wave.
Yeah.
And yet here we are together, you know, surfing the wave together, going underwater a little bit maybe sometimes, but um hmm, hmm. Feeling kind of complete on the wishes for the moment. Anything else popping up?
I mean, maybe just to build a little bit on what Mateo was saying, I think, and related to the movement, writing the budgets, is like, my wish is that those who have way more than what they need, um, have, you know, have the space and support to craft new, or like new purpose, new, you know, roles, because we need people to let go of those strings, you know, and let go of the pen that's writing, you know, whatever, like give the pen over to somebody else to write the checks or make those decisions. So I think, you know, that's one of the things that feels like people with wealth in this country are still, I mean, the whole like growth of philanthropy as like a role, you know, people have to let go of that, because that's not, so that's my wish, is that the, you know, and I care about those people. Like I know very wealthy people now because of this role that I play. And, you know, I care about people, and I want everybody to have what they need. And I think that includes a purpose and a role, but that should be separated from the wealth that you hold. And so that's my wish too.
Is it okay to add one more?
Sure. You have
And
what you need.
I'm going to ask you all to assist me on landing this one too, because it's, I think the landing isn't fully formed at all, but there is such a, you know, if we all agree that, you know, extraction is leading us to ruin, into planetary collapse, if there's so much of that logic is driven by and rooted in toxic masculinity and patriarchy, and I think what we're seeing is the flip side of the defense of that leads to fascism, whether it's hatred, fear, insecurity in that masculine shape. So, and I guess I bring it up because I see and I experience in my own body the resistance to that surrender, if you can call it something, on the left a lot, or we see it even in, like, you know, some of the more benign sides of even progressive Democrats who still somehow think that growth, everlasting growth, is an option. So again, I don't know how to land this thought, but it's there's some veil lifting and then there's veil shutting happening almost every day in both directions. But it feels like, yeah, I wish for that to be utterly transformed. I'm struggling because it's not a precise landing, but
That's
but
okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Are you speaking of, I mean, when you say that, I'm hearing the shift from, the power over of patriarchy becoming a power with community, and the healing and the surrendering, that the patriarch in all of us needs to, in me and all of
Yeah, I
us,
guess maybe
go
since
through.
a lot of our conversation has been around the hoarding of wealth, feels like the power overing, the power grabbing, the defending of that, the violence that comes out of defending that, and then just the wanton violence that it generates. It all feels very rooted in that.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mhm.
mine to rule over
Mhm.
frame of thinking that seems
Right.
comes
Yeah.
out
I
of
think,
patriarchy.
yeah, and I think what you're naming about like toxic masculinity versus like a nurturing, like meeting needs first kind of, which we I think we tend to associate with like matriarchal
Mhm.
principles, but can be masculine and feminine and everything else. Right, so transforming that toxic masculinity, composting it and transforming it into the kind of nurturing force that we need to do the things that you were naming before, about like where we shift to this, we're all in it together,
Mhm.
and we care about everyone in it, not just ourselves, not just like the small group that we're supposed to be like responsible for protecting or something, like we understand that we're all connected.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Whoa, lots of thoughts popping up, but let's, before we go there into discussion, let's go into some dreaming and imagining that your wishes, say maybe we're a year from now or 2 years from now, we're going to wave a magic wand and say that your wishes have come true. These wishes, these wild, wonderful wishes have come true. Just sit with that for a minute and, live into that. What could that feel like? What could that look like? And as a piece of this dreaming, imagine that you have been part of a cohort of allies that has been on that journey with you, a lab, a world that we want to live in lab, that's experimenting with these structures and governances and sharing knowledge and building relationships and moving resources together. And see if you can describe what being in this cohort looks like, and what you get out of it, and how it helped your wishes come true. And if it helps, land it in a place. And if it doesn't help, forget that. But And whenever you're ready, take it away. I see Michelle all.
No? I don't
I
know.
know, both of you are smiling and popping. That's great. Go for it.
That was fun. Can we stay there?
Yeah. Hey, we're living there. We're in the future. We're here.
Yeah, I could see it both place-based or a kind of on the national front. But I think practicing governance together, kind of like actually, like I said, like making up budgets together. We did this 10 years ago when we started CJA. Taj was reminding me the other day that, we sat down and we just made a $10 million budget. At that time, we didn't have anything. Like we were just staffing it out of our different organizations. It was important to have that process together, and so I can imagine having that across movements or across sectors or across, types of organizations in a cohort, could be just really healing, first of all, and secondly, build a kind of muscle and practice, but also have some real like tangible things to put out there and fight for together, like as a unified force. So that's one thing that came to my mind.
What came to me was, I think my mind started going like, what does it, if kind of the economic crisis continues accentuating? Again, to borrow from one of, I think, Michelle's super useful frames, is like, what would it look like if there is a cathartic shift in people's conception from jobs to roles? It's like, fuck, there just isn't a job there for me. There isn't going to be. So what is our collective process of defining what are the most useful roles for all of us to play in co-design from here on out, and to imagine, again, very similar to what Michelle just said, what does co-governance look like if folks start kind of reclaiming unused housing space or open lots for, healing centers or for food distribution, so I was just really imagining into that. What does it look like to have the sprouting in urban and semi-urban and rural centers alike of folks just coming together with healers and mediators and teachers at the center of like orchestrating the shared thinking and initial acting. Okay, these are our first 3 priorities in this area. This is the highest need. Let's get to work. And folks just self-identify like, I'm really good at that, or I'm really good at learning those kind of skills and coordinating. Okay, who has the skills to do some of the triage teaching? And let's go. And imagining, again, to name a person we've named before that some folks on this call know, the Doria Robinsons who've already been coordinating urban agriculture projects for 10 or 20 years in a region, to start really playing the core leadership roles to become, those organic political leaders. So that's what was coming up in my mind, is like amidst the chaos of folks momentarily panicking, what does the new forms of organization and what are the gateway spaces that others who might be skeptic see and go like, wow, those folks, they know what they're doing. I think I'm going to try to understand or try to participate. Sometimes maybe even initially out of self-interest, like I need help. And that's how folks get politicized and start believing again. I say all that, and I want to be honest that I think the tremendous the tremendous upsurge of white supremacy in this country as of late is also tempering a lot of my capacity to ideate and imagine. These elections were a very sobering reminder of how fixated it seems, I'm speculating here, a lot of folks are on being angry and hating. I'm struggling to figure out what we do with that organized violence in the context of dreaming. I usually don't like vocalizing that, but since we're having a strategic conversation, it feels important to name it, because I think often we seek romantic gateways or pathways to resistance. And that may be something that I think folks in Thunder Folk circles need to appreciate, that there may be some really practical, unpleasant parts of resistance that will need supporting as well.
Mhm. Okay. Wow, that was a journey, is a journey into a exciting and sobering future. It's like I don't want to be ignoring the reality of the conflicts that we have within communities, between people and communities now, as we're moving into transforming where we live into the places where everyone can live well. I'm struggling with that too. Even where I live in a rural area, I watch a lot of controversy here. So, so I don't know. I'm hearing some noise from next door. Can you guys hear that on the call? I have to switch to the phone.
No,
You're okay?
Not
Okay.
bad.
All right. Okay. So let's thank you for that. Let's kind of take a breath for a minute and then share some, have a conversation with, I think, both Ben and me, and I can't see Junia right now. Junia first for a few minutes with just to hear our reflections and talk with Matteo and Michelle, and then we'll bring Tanya and Trey in. Ben, would you like to go first? Or Junia? Go ahead, Ben.
Well, thank you both. Yeah, there's kind of a thread that connects to something I've been sitting with, and actually that's how Trey got here also, around how big a we is possible right now. And we're thinking big and bold, and you're sharing these visions of moving beyond extractivist models focused on self-interest to collectivist ones focused on regeneration. That the collective, to have that collectivist mentality, implies being grounded in a sense of we. And your final words, Matteo, really brought home how far, how much it seems like we're going in the opposite direction. And Trey was drawn to the idea of a project to find common ground in a polarized world, to do some experiments, to learn, to see where is that possible, that both of us were energized by. And at the same time, I guess I could see a lot of that being a waste of time. I mean, I was excited by that, or thought I was into that in my work 5 years ago. And then I was like, no, I just want to support the people doing the work that I think is the work that needs to be done. And there's all these other folks that are essentially declaring war on that and trying to, in at least a cohort declaring war. But then there's this other cohort in the middle that you were also alluding to, Matteo, that they call themselves progressives and they stand for the rights of the marginalized and oppressed, but don't talk to them about the idea that we can't have endless economic growth, and don't bring up reparations. And so it feels like we're so, the we that I want to be a part of is so far from the mainstream we, and yet the fact that we're so broken and so fragmented makes me wonder, if the goal here is to move large amounts of money in service to, transforming whole economies on a regional, national, global scale. How the hell do we do that, in that context? And so I'm feeling those questions really validated by the conversation. And I don't feel like I have an answer. I guess part of what I like about what Trey and I have been talking about with a bunch of others is it's an experiment. Let's just get out there and test it. And maybe the Republicans in my town, for example, some of whom I still I reinitiated a relationship with this one guy, not a relationship. I called him up just to find out what he thought. I hadn't talked to him since 2015, and was at least relieved to hear that although he voted for Trump, he thinks that Trump trying to stay in power now is an embarrassment and ridiculous. So he hasn't drunk all the Kool-Aid. But if I talk to him about, what would we do in town, where could we find common ground? I don't know. So I guess I want to explore that, but I'm also not at all optimistic that when push comes to shove, he'll believe any of the things that I think are so fundamental, or that I think we share in terms of a vision of what the world really needs to be, and even headed to that, a lot of dark times between here and there. So that's just what's up for me now, and I'm sure it'll be part of, these relate to the decisions we have to make around what our work could be too, on our modest little budget. How can this lab really be of service? What's most useful in this moment? If we could move large amounts of money in collaborative and democratic ways into cooperative systems of generation, where is that possible, and how do we support that happening? Well, to a greater degree than it already is. And I loved hearing Doria's name a couple of times. It was so great to visit Urban Tilth a few years back, and I think of her and you all as emblematic of just these super powerful people out there just grinding away at the difficult work of day after day, and I know how many are there thousands? Are there tens of thousands? Are there millions of Dorias? I mean, she's unique. We're all unique, but I found myself sort of wondering: is that a way to go? That the people like that have built such real networks, right? Networks of real relationship and trust through literally feeding people in their communities. And we talk about networks as just this sort of abstract, wonderful thing, but there's networks and there's networks. Where how do we know if we found one of those networks and move capital through it to a greater degree? And I guess you're already doing that with CJA, certainly. Those are my musings. Dunya?
Thank you both, Matteo and Michelle. It's really an honor to be able to drink from the fire hose in such a way that I can actually drink and doesn't feel, and so this question of willingness and comes up for me, is this where is the willingness of all these stakeholders, the people with the money, the people, and just starting there. And but I love the awareness of fear being used to motivate people who do not care, and to not care, not that they do not care, but the fear as an instrument that way. And then again, just applying that also is like, yeah, I have that fear as well, but I'm not gonna let it get in the way. It was something that came up as well. But naming it is part of not letting it get in the way. So thank you, Matteo, for that. I think that that's very important. And also when you mentioned, you were asking, I also loved that you asked about helping us land that dream with the patriarchy reference and toxic masculinity, because I find that very often I'll just listen, and I love to listen, but learning also to use my voice is an exercise that is interesting, because yeah, it's interesting to realize how hard that is, and I think that's part of the same complex. So I'm excited to open up the conversation as well to hear what Tanya and Trey has, what's alive for them.
Are you complete, Dunya?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, then maybe I'll hop in here before we open it further. I think what I want to share is I just lit up when Michelle, there's so many things I lit up about, but the thing right now I want to focus on is the need to practice co-governance together with trusted networks of people. For me, it's important to practice that landed in a place or a set of places where we really, I don't know of places that are budgeting, governing and budgeting community controlled resources in place across sectors and across movements. And that's what I want to try. What does that look like? And the language I've been using for that for the last couple of years has been a public-private people partnership where the people have the power in a place. And so, you know, what I'm interested in personally is building on and having some of those places be places that where there's a lot of there already, a lot of movement power. So Richmond would be one of those places. Oakland, I think in the East Bay, I think North Bay, and I'm really passionate about seeing what this could possibly look like in the South Bay and Silicon Valley. Because if we can do it here and shift power in the heart of Silicon Valley, I think that would be really important. And I need help to do that from allies across the way, the way across the Bay. And for me, it's well beyond philanthropy. Philanthropy doesn't have the resources to do the shift that we need. We need to be able to, you know, attract and shift business partners and resources and government partners and resources. So I can imagine this lab anchoring in a few pilot sites. You know, CGA already has a set, you know. I don't know if that would be that whole set, but at least, you know, a couple of them I would love to, you know, have be partners, allies in this lab somehow. Or, you know, what we're thinking becomes part of what you're already doing, you know, if the we is big enough to do that. You know, I'm not attached to who's at the center of the we, so long as we're in it together in whatever we're trying to do. We are doing, imagining this future. Okay. I think that's good for me for now. Building the muscle, I like that too. And the healers and the mediators, and what are the 3 things that we need in this place? Let's do it. Let's get started. Complete. So that's right. I'm supposed to be weaving everybody here. Okay, so let's see. Mateo, Michelle, do you want to respond at all to that? Have more of a conversation, or are you ready to bring Tanya and Trey in?
Let's bring them in. Yeah, I want to hear what y'all think.
I'm still trying to ground and embody what I'm listening to and how it's building up inside of me. I'm incredibly grateful to witness and listen and moved. I was just on the phone like an hour or 2 ago with a young man whom I've never met. He's part of the resistance movement in Oaxaca. And they're watching efforts of generations, years, being pulled apart by this new government and private investments and the dismantling of the indigenous knowledges and structures in the region. So how big are we? It's a huge question. And I kind of tag along with Ben's last reflection, which has been lingering for me for a couple of weeks now, from a different conversation where I kept asking, where Ben was asking, how do we put together all of these pieces that we're talking about, and the respect to the small producers and the microsystems and the life forms that exist beyond globality, and generate the possibility for the coexistence of those systems within what we already know as a structure. And it just brings me back to people have very specific needs of survival. We all do, you know, but the man that I was talking to, they're struggling for their land, they're struggling for their water, their resources, their food, and they need to sell their produce. And that's como, and they need to sell the produce because it's rotting, because it's what the economy that they've known so far has made it sustainable for them so far. And the shift, just such a great shift as one we're talking about in vision. I struggle to see how to create an entirely different, at the grassroots system that allows for people to transform their lives, as well as ours, of course, because we're the main consumers, without harming their very survival process. And just it's also an ongoing conversation with Ben and others. I find that when we talk about these visions, when we talk about these dreams, and you're doing it, you're doing it in your own communities, you're actually putting it to play, and it's happening, and that there's a system that enables it, and then wham, violence, structures of consolidated, full force violence. So it's I admire the possibility to build that dream. I admire it, and I see it as something that I wish, or I would love to incarnate myself, to actually have it be part of my synapses. And I wish I could just travel to where you are and see it happening, and see that it is possible, that we can protect people from the context that we have for so long supported passively or actively, that we're embedded in and part of. And of course, there's 1,000 practical questions as to how you're organized. And yes, please come train, please. Let's do it. And I wonder, how did you do that? How did you get your lands back? How did that process happen? How did it? Did you get together one day and say, "Oh, no, let's do it"? How long did it take? How did you deal with the violence around it? Thank you.
Do you want one of us to respond? Should we respond to the question a
I
little
just
bit, or?
was gonna ask, do you want, what, maybe respond to that since it's up before moving to Trey, if that's okay?
Sure. I mean, just to clarify, we have not successfully rematriated lands, here yet. It's a 100-year vision, so, and like you're referring to it is also very difficult, I think, sometimes for us to see it as possible. The city of Berkeley just like put something on their sign that says Ohlone lands, it's a big step, right? Or it's a step, I don't know, like what do you count along that road? Shell Mound, this massive parcel of lands, we think is going to be protected because it just got listed on the top 11 sacred sites or something of nationally. So this fight that's been going on for many years, it looks like the Ohlone peoples may have won, which is exciting. But that's a small drop in this large bucket, right? So I think it does start with, putting one foot in front of the other and throwing yourself into something where your heart can see into some possibility, and where you're nurtured by connection and community in doing that. Yeah. But yeah, I just definitely wanted to clarify that we have not been successful in rematriating these unceded territories as of yet.
I would like to jump in because in hearing you, Tanya, it really made so apparent something that I've heard through the interviews that we've been having, and just crystallize, and I'm just going to read Michelle's word for word, but just the importance and the necessity to create spaces, both physical and imaginary, of spaces of radical imagination and of radical dreaming and veil lifting, so that we can really come together in the boldness of the human spirit. And what does that mean? And I really, that's why this journey has been so incredible, is because this interview is a process of that. By taking even just a stab at dreaming together, what would that lab be? And just how do we practice together that dreaming, and how do we create spaces that came up yesterday for people who usually don't have the space to dream at all, but should be the ones who are dreaming to dream, and for the people who have the money to have that same dream, so that the we can live. Thank you.
Okay, Trey, I'd love to hear your voice if you have anything that you'd like to share or ask. Thank you for your patience, both Trey and Tanya.
I think what I'm sensing is a sense of kinship and camaraderie. In a way that I've been seeking. So there's a lot of gratitude, and I have, I'm just really grateful that these conversations are being had, and that yourself, Ben, and Leslie, that you have and are creating these platforms and these opportunities for having the discussions, having the conversations, and having the dreaming. And this is the sandbox I want to play in. It's the sandbox I want to play in for the rest of my life. So very willing and interested and eager, and would very much like to continue the connection and further conversations, and just continue learning and growing with all of you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that felt so good. Welcome to the sandbox. And you too, Tanya. I would say the TRCC community network does include groups like East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative that's doing land trusts, and the Segurite Land Trust. They do have, processes that are rematriating land. So it is happening slowly, step by step, soil by soil. and let's dream more soil, more land, back in community hands. Well, we are coming to the end of our time together today for now in this sandbox. So I wanted to invite Mateo and Michelle to share any, closing thoughts, reflections, wishes.
You wanna go ahead?
Sure. Yeah, thank you all. It's been very fertile. It's beautiful to connect with you all. I think what I'm walking away with, I'm walking away with a ton of stuff, but what I want to end with is, Ben, your question, or your point around there's networks and then there's networks. And then there's like your question, are there 1,000 Dorias? Are there 10,000? But I think you were raising, I think, a really important strategic question that to me is a good landing place. I want to put a strong affirmation next to that. I think identifying and supporting and resourcing the 10,000 Dorias is arguably one of the most important things that can and needs to be done right now.
Yeah.
What came to my mind was the strategic genius of the Zapatistas having the slogan "Todos somos Marcos." And I thought of Todos somos Doria when you said that, but like, because you were highlighting her singularity, which the Zapatistas deployed so fiercely. It's just a beautiful way of like, Marcos is Marcos, and we all can be a Marcos. So I think there's something strategic around what you're saying. And I think it gets to this question that Tanya, I think you were getting at, and that we kind of touched upon through the conversation, like repression and destruction will come our way. It does come our way regularly. So we don't have a lot of security if we have one liberation project. The security lies in having 10,000 liberation projects manifesting every day in every possible location. And then that kind of the Leviathan we're up against, that's when it really starts struggling, if it can't clamp down on so many happening so fast in so many diverse ways. So that's one of my key takeaways from this conversation. What's the way that TRCC and everybody else who is down to resource hard and strong and fast and deep, what's the best way to identify the 10,000 Dorias and the 10,000 that come after that? And again, as you said, Ben, identifying what's a network, what's a truly organized community that's moving towards being a permanently organized community. And that's where it needs to be supported. Thank you all. Check.
Woo. Yeah. Also just really grateful. I wasn't really thinking this was going to be such a sweet space. Just such a sweet space. Just appreciating Ben and Leslie and Dunya, what you're holding here, and Tanya and Trey for just stepping in fully, and my compa Mateo, of course, always. And I support that too, that like, how do we resource the 10,000 Dorias? And I think, for me, I've thought about it over the years, because I know 5 or 10, Dorias, whatever, the mamas organizing to support folks who are living on the street, or organizing parents in the schools, or, doing the incredible lifting that is so unseen. And I think mostly what they need is not any kind of nonprofit money. It's just like, turn it over and let them just decide, like, if, how many times, Mateo, have we, we're not even with Doria every day, but like the number of people that she is supporting, the number of people that are relying on her, you know, and like to be able to support, to be able to deploy resources where they're needed, you know, is like a start to like being able to support people in actually formulating community self-governance, right? Yeah, and the second thing I'm leaving with is just like the realness of like how small stories and like manifestations of those radical imagination and the stepping out of away from the fear, like how big of hinges come off of those, you know, like how big of swings you can get from those small, sometimes seemingly small actions. You know, Movement Generation is a collective, and I think the way that we roll is one of the things that moves people. You know, and now like and I don't mean just like in our nonprofit structure, but like we're family, right? We throw down for each other's families. And I think that's part of what inspires people. It's not necessarily what we say about climate justice or, and I just think that's like, it's how you show up in the world and how you let go of the fear when, you know, when the opportunity presents itself to you. So I just like want to acknowledge and appreciate how much power there is in all of us, you know, to like put the hinges on the doors of transition, you know, transformation. Thank you all. It's really nice to meet you and be with y'all.
Thank you so much, everyone, for showing up with our stories and dreams and releasing our fears and moving forward faster as family together.
And just
I don't wanna
being
say
here
goodbye.
now in this sweet
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Ben, what?